Okay, this is TiKevin83, and I'm going to do a bit of a different stream right now. It's not really a stream, it's just a local recording I'm making, but I'm going to upload it to my channel on YouTube, and we're going to make a little bit of a info video about politics, some political ideologies, and some thoughts here. So I wanted for a while to explain what I think about the main political ideologies and my thoughts on politics and their implications for morality in general. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get to it. I made some quick notes here on what I think, and yeah. So I'm pretty sure personally that I think that progressivism and conservatism make up a pretty good spectrum of political beliefs. So on one hand, you have people who want government to make people progress through society. So society is in one place, they want to try to progress to another place. And then you have conservatives who want it to either stay in the status quo or they see some previous time as optimal and want to return to that as the status quo. So, and that fits a little bit better than putting the status quo with the progressives, because you can't progress towards where you are. You can stay where you are or try to stay where you were, but you can't try to progress to where you are currently. That doesn't make sense. So the conservatives get stuck with the middle ground. And basically, I think that both of these views on politics don't work, because if you're progressive, then you want society to progress. But what's the goal? Where are you trying to progress to? And a lot of people immediately say, "Oh, that's not really understanding progressivism. Progressivism doesn't have a goal. You always want to be progressing." Okay, so if you say that it doesn't have a goal, you can either say it does or it doesn't. Okay, there's no in between. You get a goal or you don't get a goal. If you get a goal, okay, then progress stops at some point, and the ideology doesn't actually work, because it would, if you're progressive, you wouldn't think that it would ever stop. So if you do think there's a goal, if you have an objective moral goal for society, then you shouldn't be a progressive, because you would want the government to stop trying to progress society towards a goal if you hit the goal, because you would think that goal is the optimal place for morals to be at. But then there's the other option of, you can be a progressive who doesn't think that there should be a goal that you're working towards, that you're constantly in a state of progress, and there's no perfect end goal for society. Well, in my opinion, that doesn't really work either, because if you're constantly pushing towards something that doesn't have a goal, you're basically opening up to, there has to be some sort of moral relativism, right? You have to be open to a relativistic view of how society is doing morally. Otherwise, if you have an objective view, then you can set a goal for society to progress to, and you get stuck. And if you're relativistic and you're saying, okay, so the optimal way that society can be arranged changes over time, then first off you have to say how it's changing. Okay, is it that the current social trends are something that needs to be enforced, and that's what progressivism is? It's trying to get the rest of society on board with the current trends, and that's how you're progressing society. Well, okay, that doesn't really work very well, because then you're just making progressivism an authoritarian concept, where the government is just trying to enforce a set of morals and trying to progress society by its enforcement and authoritarian standpoint towards those morals. So that doesn't really work. And you can say that every individual has an optimal set of morals. It's not a societal thing. It's not that society has optimal morals and the government should be enforcing society. You could say that people have individual morals, and that opens up to different people's individual morals being different in the culture. Well, then you have no standpoint of saying that the government should be progressing to anything, because you can't set one standard for the government to move towards. You're saying that everybody should have their own standard to live by for themselves. So what business would the government have trying to progress society towards some standard? That doesn't make sense either. You can't judge an individual if you believe that their morality for themselves is optimal for themselves based on a progress that you have and try to move them towards progress. You can't both want to move somebody and not want to move somebody away from their morals at the same time. That doesn't make sense. So those are all the issues that you have if you adopt a standpoint of wanting to move society in a progress forwards in time and improve its moral state. You have the problem of do you set a goal or do you not want to set a goal? Do you want to have relative morality? Do you not want to have relative morality? And all those things either end up in an authoritarianism that a progressive wouldn't usually be ascribing to, or not actually being able to make progress because it wouldn't be internally consistent. So then, okay, the next side, we got through progressivism. Now you have to get through conservatism. So conservatives have to define what they want the status quo to be. So you have a very specific set of morals that you want to be enforced across the board in society. If you're a conservative, so you have to pick what those morals are. Okay, maybe it's 2004's morals. I was so big on 2004's morals. Those were the perfect morals. We should be trying to get everybody back on board with those. Or you could be like, okay, I was really big on 1912 morality in the U.S. We should be trying to progress society. And that's the problem, because you progress society. Now it's not about the actual status quo. You're trying to progress society towards a goal of the 1912 morals, which is, so you're kind of mixing ideologies there. If you're not saying enforcing the present status quo, and you're rather saying that you want to return towards some previous status quo, which is actually what a lot of so you have like Reagan conservatives, right? Reagan was a big deal for conservatism. People wanted to go back to how things were with Reagan. Well, that doesn't really work from the conservative standpoint, because you're trying to progress society towards this ideal you have of Reagan's morals in your own mindset. A progressive wouldn't think it's progress; they would think it'd be regressive. But that's the problem, because they're seeing things from a different standpoint there. So conservatives have this problem of how do they define the status quo? How do they define what they want society to be like? So if they're saying that they want to preserve and enforce current moral trends, that's just being an authoritarian. That's just saying you want to use government to enforce something. Because society already in general would be following those moral trends. And you're really, at that point, you're not really any different from a relativist progressive, because at any point in time, morality is going to be changing. And you're saying that at any given point in time, you want it to be preserved the way it is. So you're okay with different sets of morality, which is not actually generally how conservatives are seen. So you start to lose some internal consistency there if you say that you want to ascribe to a present day status quo. If you choose some point in the past, then you are kind of looking like a goal-based progressive, and I kind of already touched on that a bit. But if you're a progressive and you have some goal for an optimal set of morals, and you want the government to enforce those morals and on society and shape society in that way, and that's what you're trying to progress towards. Well, that's really the same thing with conservatives that want things to be in a specific time in the past and enforced. It's just they're looking at a different set of objective truths that they see about how things should be. So you're starting to lose the distinction again, and then so that's not really a functional way of having an ideology. It's not internally consistent. It's not separable from other ideologies. And then, so what we're seeing here is that both progressive and conservative political ideologies have this implicit assumption that government is the correct solution to enforcing social order and morality. And that's the problem. From my political standpoint, the government isn't there to enforce a moral order or a specific set of morals on society. The government is trying to create a playing field, basically. It's setting up a set of rules for a game, which is capitalism, basically, and trying to optimize the game of capitalism so that people can play the game most effectively. And you can you can argue all day about which rules are best. Like, okay, do we need to give everyone health care so that they can be healthy and play the game? Well, do we only need to give people a little bit of health care so that they can all share in playing the game of capitalism? Do we need to give them a lot of health care to share in the game of playing capitalism? Is it effective? Like, is the game going to be a better game if you give people health care, or is it going to be a worse game? Is it going to be less competitive or less 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 fun of a game to play? You know, if everybody has to have really good health care, what fun is there in playing the game? It's like the Incredibles problem, where if everybody's super, then nobody is. He's trying to make everybody a superhero in the Incredibles, the villain. He's trying to make everybody a superhero, right? So that nobody looks like a superhero anymore. And that's effectively the problem with that extreme end of political thought, where we just have to give everybody everything and to maximize the playing field. Well, if you give everybody all of the resources to play the game of capitalism, well, then it's almost the same as if nobody had any resources, and the game becomes meaningless again. And then on the flip side, if you give no protections at all, it's saying like, okay, we're not even gonna have a fire department. That's one of the things that libertarianism is often most criticized for. It's like, how are we gonna handle the fire department? How are we gonna handle roads? Clearly, the government has to be able to do those things. Well, that's going too far in the other direction too, where if you give no rules at all, no ground rules for playing the game of capitalism, then you're not helping set the rules. You're not helping set the playing field so that people can compete effectively. So things like telephone lines, internet service, roads, cops, fire department, those sorts of things, in my mind, make sense to include under like a libertarian paradigm for how to arrange society, because those are the things that most enable people to get onto the playing field and start playing the game of capitalism, which is for all intents and purposes, the only game that we understand to be effective at people playing and not really making some serious problems for the way that the government interacts with people in terms of freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. Capitalism historically has been the only way of actually preserving those systems. So that's my opinion on the political standpoint, and why the typical Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive system doesn't actually work. It doesn't make sense. They're not internally consistent belief systems, and way more people are authoritarian. Way more people are authoritarian with the way they review government than they think, and that if they reevaluated what they think about progressivism and conservatism, they would not actually want to be involved in those things, because they would see them as too authoritarian. And people complain a lot about the current state of affairs with fascism, right? People think that the current government in the U.S. is too fascist. Well, you can't really make that complaint when your own belief system, if you're a progressive, says you want to use the government to enforce a set of constantly evolving morals, because you're really kind of susceptible to the same sort of authoritarian viewpoint about government that a fascist might be. And then on the flip side, what is a conservative going to do with the idea that they're being authoritarian if they want to enforce a status quo? If they're not open to society changing over time towards their goal, and they're just trying to enforce a very specific status quo with how society is organized, and that's the kind of authoritarianism that they wish not to be accused of in the current political climate. So those things don't really work. And my solution instead is to try to propose minarchy, which is a subset of libertarianism, where people just try to minimize government to the absolute smallest or most efficient parts of enacting rules that give a level playing field so that people can play the game of capitalism without being taken advantage of by other individuals in the game or by the government who's trying to organize the game. And that will eventually, in my opinion, lead to a society for themselves organizing out the kind of moral order that both conservatives and progressives would actually be hoping. Because over time, with all the competition from capitalism, you would game your way to an optimal society. In my thought process, that isn't necessarily true. That's just how I see things. So, if anybody has any ideas or objections to this line of thought, they can leave comments in the chat. I'm gonna move on to like a segment 2 now, quick, just outlining why I have issues, because I touched on moral relativism briefly in the video, and moral objectivism, because you have to explain some of my issues with this 2-part system of progressivism and conservatism. Well, so I'll just briefly go over this. I have problems with moral relativism as an ideology, because if you say that any you can basically say 2 things with moral relativism. You can say that you're looking at every society's set of morals as their majority people in the society view them is optimal for that society, or shouldn't be changed. People shouldn't be trying to change it. Or you can say that individuals hold their own morality, and that society shouldn't be trying to change because everybody's own morals is relative to each other. And in my opinion, both of these issues have problems. In my opinion, individual moral relativism doesn't work immediately, because you fail to be able to criticize things like murder and basically any other very, very basic function of society. You can't enforce the rule anymore, because if somebody on their own is able to define what their rules are for themselves, how can you prevent them from saying, okay, it's okay for me to murder someone, right? You might be able to throw them in jail for having done it, but if you say that it's okay for them to think that, it still might end up in getting somebody else killed. So unless your morality is okay with that sort of thing happening, you might want to steer away from individualist morality. Relativist morality, collective moral relativism, where you have a whole society as a collective setting their morality. This is kind of like the view that it's okay for people in the Middle East to be Muslim as a majority, and it might be. I'm not saying that's not correct. It totally might be okay for people in the Middle East to be Muslim, and for the United States to be majority Christian. That's not the point of this at all, to handle that issue. The point is just to say that if you say that both of things are correct, you're going to run into issues separately, because it creates paradoxes. The paradox I like to set up is a thought experiment where you have a society. Let's say there's 100 people, just for a round number, and 50 of the people in the society think that it's morally good to commit suicide, and 50 of the people in the society think it's bad. So it's like a dead even heat. That's one society. So in a relativist system, what happens to that society if somebody commits suicide on either side, right? Because if one side of the people, one of those people commits suicide, then the opposite side's opinion gains the majority, right? So let's say it's somebody from the side of the 50 that believes that suicide is morally bad commits suicide. That would then instantaneously make, in that society, committing suicide morally good, and his own belief about what he did would be contradicted. And likewise, the opposite. If somebody who believes that that it's okay for people to commit suicide in the society commits suicide, then he would die. His group would have 49 people, and the other group would have 50 people. They'd be outnumbered, and now suddenly for society as a total, they collectively believe that it's a net good, or net, actually, sorry, this was evil. So now they believe it's a net evil. So one side commits suicide, then you have it suddenly being a net good. The other side commits suicide. You have it suddenly being net evil. How do you resolve that? It's simply a paradox. You could say that there's a temporal problem where like the instant before they commit suicide is a different society than the instant then after they commit suicide, but that's somewhat illogical on its face, because you're saying that now we have to evaluate societies as they exist at every single point in time separately. So the society that exists in the United States would have a different moral standard from the beginning of me doing this video to the end of me doing this video. And that basically makes moral standards not functional, right? If you have to reevaluate them that constantly, how is it functional? You're saying that the moral standard that the community sets is changing so rapidly as to make it paradoxical, or opening it to paradox. It's so that I don't think either individual relativism or collective relativism holds water. There has to be some sort of objective set of morality, and the way I kind of like rationalize that is, if you hold a set of morals, okay, that's one set, but then there's the set of all possible sets of moral beliefs. So you have the set of the morals that you believe to be good, and you have the set of all sets of morals. Well, then also somewhere in the set of all sets of morals, there's going to be one that is the optimal one for society, by some metric. Maybe it's the optimal one for society, creating the most net happiness. And this is a very utilitarian perspective on society, but most net happiness, most net wealth. You could say that's a kind of strange metric to measure morality by. But you could pick any number of, or maybe lifespan. You could say the morality that optimizes the most lifespan for individuals, so they have the most opportunity to enjoy life, enjoy happiness. So let's see, where was I going with this? They have all of so you have all those different sets of morals in the set of all sets of morals, and one of those is going to be the best at whatever metric you're looking at to evaluate it. I don't necessarily think that I personally know the best way to evaluate morality, but I think that for any way you want to evaluate, if you pick, like, let's say, the set of morality that would optimize lifespan, okay, you can pick that one, and then for that test, there would be a set of morals within all of the sets of morals that would be optimal for humans to live by to maximize the lifespan of that community. That's just kind of like a logical imperative there if you're going by that truth. The only problem with that set of reasoning is if you don't believe that morals actually exist, because that is a totally logical way to go with this. You can just say there isn't such a thing as morality. Morality doesn't exist. There isn't a relative morality. There isn't a objective morality. That there is no morality. That's another way of solving the problem. Basically, you say there is no problem because this thing that you're trying to solve for doesn't exist, and that doesn't have like a perfectly clear solution. And obviously, also most people in America set the standard that they believe to be the objectively true set of morals as Christian morals. Of course, that doesn't end up working out too well because there's like thousands and thousands of denominations of Christianity in the U.S. So you have thousands of sets of morals that are all competing even within that belief that Christian morals are optimal. So even though I identify as a Christian or a agnostic Christian to some extent, I don't necessarily think that I have the best grip on what the perfect objective morality is, because I haven't done enough math, research, whatever, to pick out that best set of morals from the set of all possible sets of morals. And with so many possibilities for different morals, like almost, you could say, infinite, it would be improbable for me personally to be able to pick the perfect ones. So it's really just the goal of a video like this is to point out how much thought you have to put into these sorts of things to evaluate political beliefs and personal beliefs about morality. And from my standpoint, more people should be putting thought into these things, and then people could, by sharing beliefs about morality, could start to build on them and build beliefs into and towards the actual correct answer. Because in my opinion, there is a correct answer. There is an objective set of best morals for human society. It is out there inside the set of all possible sets of morals, and unless we start evaluating it, we're not going to be progressing towards it as a society. And so I consider myself in a way a progressive, because I think that society should be progressing towards that set of morals that exists out there, that is optimal in some way for society. But I'm not progressive in the sense that I ascribe myself to the Democratic Party. That's not I've already talked about that in this video. That line of thinking isn't internally consistent. I'm just saying that I think that society should progress to that, because I think that it exists, and I think that the other potentialities with relativism don't work. So, a minarchy, where it's a minimum government, minarchy. That's people say theocracy or plutarchy, all sorts of words like that to describe governments. This is another way of describing how you organize a government with minimum impact on society. That's how I think that government should organize. I think that it should be trying to work towards in sort of a progressive sense, towards that minimum set that helps people as a society get towards, without actually being imposed by the government, but simply setting a set of rules for people to play on. And by playing the game of capitalism, they would be able to work towards, amongst themselves, believing the morals that are the optimal set of morals for a society within the set of all possible morals. So that's my political rant. I got almost up to 30 minutes there. I hope I wasn't too ranty. I might have been talking too fast at certain points. It's like YouTube has a slow down function. It's actually specifically designed for TiKevin83, so that you can understand his political rants at half speed. I'll try to maybe make some links to terms that I use in the video and ways that they're defined by other people, because I'm defining all these terms in my own ways for my own purposes, and other people aren't going to define them the same ways. So I'll put some links to ways they're defined by other people in the description of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you around.